At a luncheon he was invited to, Albert Einstein once decided against giving a lecture on his research and instead chose to play something on his violin. What does that have to do with anything? Well, if I do this right, it will all make sense in the end. Hopefully. And be relatable. Hopefully. Anyways, we'll get back to Einstein, but first let's talk about some other academics. Last summer we had to write a short paper for a university seminar about human physiology and medicine. Our professor gave us a soft limit of 20 pages, and I'm sure most of you watching know what this turned into. Some people would go over, some would try to go under but still be close enough for it not to seem like a big deal, and then there would be people handing in much more than was asked. And notice how I chose the term asked and not necessary. Some of my friends decided 20 wouldn't cut it, so their finished paper amounted to more than 40 pages. Something so far away from the designated number, it had to have raised some concerns among the group, but no. They were absolutely aware of this fact, but never once thought it to be a problem to solve. I imagine if they had written too little, they would have actively tried to fix this, but it seems, and this feels somewhat like a general opinion, that more is always better. After all, it shows just how much work you put in, right? Well, correct, as long as we are operating under the shady assumption that only amount equals effort and that effort is the most important thing. Granted, this paper was not going to be graded. There was only pass or not pass, so this would have never gotten them into trouble, which probably influenced their relaxed dispositions. But I still feel as though this general misconception of more is always better lives in a lot of us. Think about it in terms of video games. Is a long game automatically better and or automatically had more work put into it than a shorter one? If I understand my currently non-existent viewer base correctly, the answer to this question should obviously be a resounding no. Under this assumption, games that don't really have an end, such as Apex or The Sims, or games with an incredibly large amount of content like World of Warcraft or other MMOs should be some of the very best games out there, while games such as these just aren't as good. I mean, I didn't go out of Breath of the Wild saying I wish they had put in more shrines. Quite the opposite, really. I would have been happier with fewer shrines if it meant the ones we did get would have been more interesting. And that's the key right there. It's seldom about length, or in other words quantity, but mostly about the quality of the content itself. A game should be as short as it needs to be for the content to be only of the highest possible quality. In other words, only have well-designed features and not filler content just for the sake of having more content. Now, let's take this and apply it to a hypothetical problem where we put ourselves in Einstein's situation. Just imagine being one of the most influential scientists in human history. Pretty simple, right? Like I mentioned earlier, he was invited to a luncheon and asked to give a lecture. Keeping in mind that more is not always better and quality usually comes before quantity, he will likely decide against holding a 40-minute speech about every scientific topic he can think of, plus a segment about his day and his sleep schedule or his cat. I don't actually know if he had a cat or whether or not he had pets at all, but you get the point. Instead of doing that, he will keep the content of the speech precise and at a high quality. But this is all pretty obvious stuff, right? So let's keep thinking about what we should be thinking about and check in with Einstein again later. Logically speaking, there are two ways to ensure your thing is of exclusively high quality in every way. The first would be to not create subpar content in the first place, which is hard to put into practice because no feature or system or artwork will ever be perfect immediately. Not to mention that perfection in itself can be argued to not exist at all, since everything is based on opinion anyways. So let's just replace the perfect product with a very good one. If you want to not create bad stuff in the first place, it's important to understand what you and your team can do. Limiting factors to this can be both the skills of the team in each of their respective fields, but also, and this might just be the more important one, resources. Resources such as time and money constrict developers of all kinds, and it is not uncommon for studios to mismanage their resources and end up with a rushed, unfinished product because of it. Some developers might just have too high expectations or are a tad delusional even. They go at development with the goal, or maybe even expectation, of creating the most amazing game, the perfect experience. It doesn't take much to understand that this is a fool's errand. And don't get me wrong, keep that goal in mind. Try and create the epitome of your team's current artistic prowess. It will be your motivation throughout the long and difficult process that is game development. But never forget that whether we like it or not, the game industry is just that, an industry. No matter what, developers will need money to pay the team, money for marketing, money for rights and assets, and on top of that operate under a strict time limit because time also is, you guessed it, money. So Don't be the team that thinks it can just motherload in every new idea without consequence. Sorry, but real life is much more hardcore than that. Just like The Sims without cheats. In The Art of Game Design, Jesse Schell also makes a point of emphasizing that you should only implement and work on features if you believe you can execute on them properly. Fire Emblem Fates is guilty of this, for example. All 3 versions of the game feature beautiful top-down battle maps and character sprites and portraits. Yet these horrible-looking models and terribly empty landscapes are what players have to endure during most dialogue cutscenes. The same thing happens with the battle animations, which are silly at best, making it hard to get invested in emotional moments. Here I feel the game would have benefited from not using the half-baked 3D models and textures and instead just using the top-down battle maps as backgrounds for conversations. They not only look better, but it could have also saved the team from having to create 3D assets and animations in the first place, freeing them up to polish other areas. Having cutscenes and actual gameplay segments happen in the same mode would have also reduced chances for potential disconnects. But the way it stands, it feels like a case of the team not understanding which features they could execute well and which they could not. Bringing this back to Einstein, he might think about what it is that he is good at. Now, this answer should be quite obvious, since the very reason he was invited to hold a lecture was because of his scientific advancements. He's good at physics and stuff, and that is what he's supposed to talk about, so he should be good, right? He sure should be with what we have right now, but what if we dig even deeper than this? The other way to ensure there is only quality content would be to remove useless parts after the fact. Matt Colville, game designer, YouTuber, fantasy author, and king of Kickstarter, put it like this in one of his videos. Be aware that I am paraphrasing here because I do not remember the exact quote and can't find the video anymore. He said that your book, oh, he was talking about books by the way, your book is done when you can't cut anything anymore, and not when you can't come up with anything more to add. But this is really difficult, because we tend to overly fall in love with our ideas to the point where we take them out for dinner, enter a relationship, spend some happy years, or maybe even get engaged. I proposed to my friends many times that they should cut some stuff, and while they agreed, they just argued that it wasn't possible. Everything they put in the paper was necessary to understand the topic, but our teacher gave them the assignment knowing fully well what was important, so there must have been a way to somehow end up under the page limit, to trim the fat, so to say. Maybe they overcomplicated things or repeated themselves, who knows. I didn't read it. If you want to cut unnecessary features, you will first have to figure out what is important for your design. Otherwise, you would just be removing things at random. Here is where having clear goals for the game comes in handy. You want to know exactly what your game is about, what it is trying to do and be. This is often called the core of the game. It's the quintessential experience or gameplay element you are trying to convey. A core could be feeling like Spider-Man, or just simply jumping. As you can see, cores are often tied to certain game mechanics, which are subsequently named core mechanics. Now, why is this so important? Well, a couple of things. Or more like a pair. I have two things. Firstly, and this goes back to trimming the fat, it will help you stay on track and not waste time with useless features. While developing, you will always take a step back and ask yourself, does this strengthen or at the very least fit our core? If it doesn't, the element will have to be changed or dropped entirely. In other words, having a solid core will help inform every other decision the team makes. Bennett Foddy wanted to create a frustrating and unforgiving experience of climbing a mountain, while at the same time raveling at how inherently pointless games and therefore the anger created through playing games is. And this led to every other creative decision he made. If he ever had the thought of adding save points or making the controls more responsive and easier to use, thinking back to this core would have helped him make a decision. Last but not least, a core will also be extremely important when describing a game to other people, possibly a potential publisher. No one wants to listen to a clueless developer explain every little detail about a game design for 20 minutes without ever getting to the core of the design. What will the game be about? What will the player be doing most of the time? That's it. Keep it short and simple, and the core will be very useful. At this point in his thinking process, Einstein might start contemplating not only what makes for a good topic, but also what the point of his lecture is going to be. What does he want people to take away from it? Maybe he realizes that there are certain parts of his research he finds absolutely crucial to understanding physics and his theories, so he decides to put his focus on exactly that. No matter what he talks about, this will be the silver lining holding the speech together. The one main point he wants people to take back home, even if they don't retain anything else. Now that he also has a clear goal in mind to guide him, what else could there possibly be? He even made sure to think about what the people listening will get from this. But of course, there's more, as there always is and always will be. Figuring out what we, the developers, deem important is not the end of it. Like I mentioned earlier, games are part of an industry whether we like it or not. They are products to sell, which means that for them to be sold, there must first be customers willing to buy them. It is absolutely crucial to never forget about this. Games are made for the players, so naturally we should take extra care when thinking about their wishes and expectations and how to meet them. But human beings are very complex and there are a lot of us out there, each with different likes and dislikes, so in order to figure out what the people you're making the game for want, you first have to figure out who these people are. This group of customers you consider your product's most likely buyers is called the target audience. It's a phrase you will hear pretty much anywhere, from writing to marketing to comedy to acting. And for good reason. How can developers possibly hope to create a successful product if they don't even take the time to think about what their consumers want? This becomes especially clear when defining successful as something highly regarded by its customers. All of these consumers, or in our case players, will obviously have something in common. Some of these traits can be, but are not limited to, age, gender, general interests, or income, all of which can play a role depending on the type of game you're making. Call of Duty, for example, is tailored to different ages and gender than Barbie games. It should also not surprise anyone that interests are important when determining a target audience. Sports games rely heavily on the love a lot of people have for the real thing, no matter if what they enjoy about it is actually participating or watching. When looking at income as a potential factor, differences become clear as soon as you understand, for example, that players also have to buy the system for which a game is created. Otherwise, they can't play it, obviously. If you develop for PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, you can assume most people will already own at least one of the above. But a VR game will not be as easy to sell since not as many people own the relatively new and relatively expensive technology yet. In this way, the platforms you choose to emulate your game can also heavily influence the experience and the target audience. Since we now understand who the people buying the games will be, we need to figure out what they would likely enjoy. This can be quite difficult indeed, as sometimes they don't even know it themselves, just like how you might have a hard time explaining why you like a certain song and dislike another. There are multiple layers to look at, and doing so would definitely go over the scope of this video. I will, however, talk a lot about player motivation and the like in an upcoming series about psychology and its place in game design. So I guess there's a plug for you. Now that we've come this far in our process, the last thing I want to know is how the two factors at the heart of the structure influence each other. The way I see it, there are two extremes of looking at the relationship between core and target audience. You can either start with the core and then think about which type of person would be into that, or you can start with a group of people and try to determine what kind of game they would like. Either way is fine really, but in reality the relationship will most likely not be this one-sided anyways. Both sides will likely influence the other throughout the entire process from the first conception to having a finished product. In any case, having a clearly defined target audience will help, much like having a clearly defined core will. Knowing all of this, Einstein might start thinking about who the people watching are and what they might want. Well, they will likely not be scientists, but they are still coming to see him talk about physics. What they want must be the physics then. But they could get a lecture about physics from other scientists too, so it must be his specific knowledge and studies they seek. But maybe there's a different common factor here, something he overlooked. Maybe it's Einstein himself. Maybe the people are not necessarily coming to see Einstein talk about physics, but to just see and listen to Einstein. They're interested in the gravity of his name and not the one that can be explained with math. The people just want him, and like I already mentioned, they probably wouldn't have known that beforehand either. To again quote from The Art of Game Design, "You must know what your audience will and will not like, and you must know it even better than they do." You would think that finding out what people want would be easy, but it isn't, because in many cases, they don't really know. They might think they know, but often there's a big difference between what they think they want and what it is they will actually enjoy. And Einstein did just that here. He gave people a memorable experience with the legendary Albert Einstein, instead of likely boring them with physics. His process for getting there might have been close to the one I've been describing. Dismissing the thought of going overboard just for the sake of it, he could have asked, what is too much? Keeping in mind the quality he wants a speech to have, he might have wondered, what is it I'm good at? But also what is important? this might have brought him to something close to a core. Keeping at it, there's also the question of who are the people that will be listening, and lastly, what do they want? See how this is a process where all the questions go hand in hand with one another? Digging deeper and asking yourself more of these questions will further inform and potentially drastically change your outlook on your entire design. After all, it can be quite surprising how all of this can let you arrive here, at a single violin. So, what is the takeaway here? Well, let me put it this way. If you go through this entire process, you might also one day play on your violin instead of giving a lecture about physics, because you will be Albert Einstein. Actually, thinking about it, that situation sounds unlikely. Maybe this isn't as applicable as I thought. Hey, is this relatable? I don't think this is relatable. Okay, here's the game-related takeaway just in case I was too subtle. When creating something, less is more often than not superior to more, especially if it results in better focus, which results in better quality of important features. For this you need to understand two things though. What are the game's themes and important features, and most importantly, what does my audience want/expect? There. Now it's relatable.